Hello, everybody. We're back. It's Lucas Kendall and my friend Charlie Vignola for our screenwriting talk show. We've taken a few weeks off, and it's just us. So we're no interview today. Charlie said, "Why don't we just do us again?" I was like, "Okay,
Yeah, we're interesting sometimes
we
without
are."
a third party, and we should give it a shot. Lucas and I were just talking before the show began about notes, which is a critical part of the screenwriting process. Whether you're giving them, whether you're getting them, how you interpret them, how you execute them, and we're both coming at it from different perspectives right now. So we thought, it's a good overall umbrella topic for what both of us are currently dealing with right now. And if you're wanting to be a professional screenwriter, there's no way around it. You're going to be confronting notes one way or another from the production company, from the studio, from the network, from the director who's attached, from the stars that are going to get involved. It's just a part of the process. And so if you've never had them before, get ready, because we're going to talk about what notes are and how they can either help or hinder, and how you have to deal with them one way or another.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're here because you have way more experience than I do. How do we get into this? Because
Okay.
so we have a friend, and I just wrote notes for the friend, and you're also writing a pilot, and you received some notes.
Yes.
And so,
Okay.
how did you want to get into this?
Well, let's talk a little bit about. So we have a friend who's working on a TV pilot right now, a mutual friend of Lucas and myself, and we're both in the process of sort of helping with notes. Me more informally, and Lucas wrote some specific notes, more like sort of development style notes that you would get from a production company or development executives. And but they're both with the same thought in mind, which is how do you take a piece of material and how do you improve it? What are you focusing on when you're giving the notes? And again, there are a lot of different ways to do this. Now, my job for over 30 years at Jerry Bruckheimer Films, and prior to that, Don Simpson, Jerry Bruckheimer Films, was exactly this, which was giving notes to writers on movie scripts, treatments, TV pilots, every sort of like feature film and television writing imaginable. And the goal of written notes or verbal notes is to analyze a piece of material and try to figure out how to improve it. Now, obviously, that is a very broad, uh, very broad mandate, because improve means different things to different people. What I always took it as is, first of all, you have to get a consensus from everybody who's working on a project as to what the project is meant to be. Like you have to have some broadly defined terms as to what you're going for in terms of whatever the material is. If it's a comedy, if it's an action adventure, if it's a horror movie, you have to all be on the same page as to what you're trying to accomplish. And generally that's done before you even start laying out the outline, which is like, here's what we're going for, here's kind of the vibe, here's the characters. So you have a lot of discussions before you get to that point where you start committing to an outline or a treatment or anything like that, because the development process actually starts before there's even a script. The development process a lot of times has to do with conversations you have before you even sit down to write an outline or a treatment, because that's the kind of the blueprint for the script before you even start writing screenplay pages. So these conversations about how you're going to develop the material, they start way early. And so when you're giving notes to somebody, you're starting then. You're all figuring out, like, what is the direction, what is the journey, what is the focus of this thing that we're going to start doing. So you have to make sure that everybody is in agreement on that, because if you're giving 12 different notes, and this does happen sometimes if things are not organized, and it really drives writers nuts, is like, you're dealing with 9 different people with 9 different perspectives of what to do with a piece of material. And you have to then prioritize, well, who am I listening to here? Who has the power in the hierarchy? Is it the producer? Is it the development people? Is it the star? Is it the director? And a poor writer, a lot of times, especially as you get further down the road with a piece of material, has a lot of stuff coming at him from a lot of different angles, especially when you're doing like that production level rewrite. You know, when you've been hired to work on a movie that's actually being shot or maybe being reshot, you know, and you're dealing with the director, you're dealing with the studio, and you're dealing with stars and all that kind of stuff. Like there's a lot coming at you. So a writer has to be able to synthesize all that material and prioritize what to follow. But at the very beginning of the process, yes, it's like, let's figure out what story we're going to tell. Are we all in agreement? Great. And then hopefully all of your notes, you know, if you're giving the notes, you know, your job is to try to be as clear as possible in conveying what you want to see: character, theme, dialogue, structure, tone, all of those things, so that the writer understands what you're going for. And then their job is going to be, okay, I'm going to try to hit those marks in my treatment and my outline as best I can. And it's a process. Obviously, it doesn't happen like, okay, you have one meeting, you have one outline, perfect, go right. Maybe it's rare. Sometimes it happens. You can win the lotto in one ticket too, but it rarely happens. But more often, it's kind of like a process. You go over a couple of different outlines and treatments, and it's kind of building and growing and expanding as you go through a couple of different passes with the notes from the development people. Usually it's not really a studio level thing at the beginning. It's really sort of a production company and one or two, maybe three development people sitting down with you about what is if it's an adaptation, you know, how we're trying to adapt this book or this TV show or this comic. And then your job is to kind of give them a series of documents that are fleshing out those thoughts along with their notes until you get to the point where everybody's in agreement on the outline or the treatment and go, okay, we all like this. We all like these ideas. You put it down on paper. Well, go, and we'll see you in 3 or 4 months after you write the screenplay. That's the very, very beginning of the process. But then once you have gone through this, you know, after that sort of early period of going through all the different kind of pre-scripting documents, now you write the entire screenplay, and then a whole new series of meetings begin with your notes based on that material. Now, things you agree to in the outline might not be working so well when you actually get the screenplay in front of you. It's like, theoretically, that seemed like a good idea, but it's having a hard time on the page for a variety of reasons. So let's sort of discuss how to make this better, how to make this clearer. And I think we've talked about this, Lucas, on other shows, but a lot of the notes are about clarity. And maybe this is a good way to kind of segue into the notes that you gave to our friend, because you know, when you're reading a piece of, like with this TV pilot that Lucas and our friend worked on, you know, we weren't really there from the inception. It was a pilot that was already written, that was given to us, so we didn't talk to him from the very beginning about like what his concept was, and we didn't see all those early kind of outline treatment documents. We just got like a pilot script, so we were giving notes from that point on. But I noticed when I read your notes, Lucas, that, like, you know, a great deal of the notes were about clarity issues. That's what you were focusing on as you were reading it. You were trying to understand what he's going for, what the idea is, how he's executing the idea, and you were asking a lot of questions about clarity.
Correct. Yes, I don't know. Yes, I mean, I'm trying to be delicate because we haven't even asked our friend if we could make a guinea pig out of it.
Yeah, we won't go into
Yeah.
specifics about what it's about or anything, but it's
And
a thriller.
our friend, it's a spec pilot, and he's you know, he's got a vision, and so I always have you know, I don't know if I'm a great person at giving notes, because one of the biggest problems is that I tend to latch on to something that I think would be a different, and for me, a more interesting direction that's not what they want to do. So then it's like, okay, you know, take it or leave it. And that probably there was some of that here. Are you watching?
And by the way, that's worth talking about for a second, because that is a type of note, and depending on where you are in the development process, you know, it's different again in this case, because as we discussed, you weren't there from the inception of the concept, right? So when he had this idea about what he wanted to do and started building out the story, you know, you weren't part of that process, you know, as a sounding board. Therefore, he went down certain paths from the very beginning, which maybe if you were part of that early process, like you would be if it was just like a pitch at a production company. You could have steered it in a certain direction to be more aligned with, what your version of that basic
Yeah, but
concept
nobody likes my
is.
version. Nobody ever likes
Yeah,
my version.
but that's the trick when you jump
Yeah.
in like we're doing now, which is like this is several passes, some time that he's been developing this idea. You can give two different kinds of notes. One is, here's what I would do with it as a writer. Like, here's my conception of your premise. That's a certain type of note. Then the other one is, okay, I understand this is your conception of the premise, and I'm understanding your intent. So how can I give you notes to help you execute that the best, clearest, most successful, effective way possible? And those are two completely different things. So you're saying, like, some of the notes you gave were, well, if I was starting out with this idea from the very beginning, here's how I would boil it down or simplify it or streamline it. Here's how I would do it. You went down a different path. It's a little bit more complicated. There are more details, like, and maybe my version of it wouldn't have all that kind of stuff. So I would do this. You'd have to ask the individual writer how helpful that is, because it's like, again, a writer might be like willing to kind of go back to the drawing board and go, okay, I'm gonna blow it all up, restart from scratch, just take the basic premise and rebuild everything, rewrite. It's called the page one rewrite. Write it all from page one as if it didn't exist before. Or, okay, that's interesting. That's the way you would go, but how do I fix what I'm trying to do? How do I address the version that I'm trying to make? And that creates, a different kind of language and dynamic in the notes, right?
Yeah, I should add, though, that with my own work, I've had the most success just blowing it up and doing a totally different version.
Right. That's
things
your
that
process.
Yeah, it's my process. It takes a long time, and hopefully, as I get better at this, I don't have so many, oops,
Right.
starts. But I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Another friend of ours, and I will use his name because he gave me a really, really good note. So Greg Brooker,
Right.
Greg, and
yeah,
he's been a working writer a long, long time. I have a project that is about idiot Star Trek fans trying to make an overproduced fan film. It's called Fan Film, and now it's a TV show, but originally it was a feature. And Greg read the feature and he liked it. It was nice about it, but he said, "Look, I have a note for you, but it's a big note." And I originally had written these characters to be kind of in the LA area, sort of film business washouts. And he said, the problem with your script is that these guys aren't really underdogs. They're like middle dogs. This really needs to be total underdogs from the middle of the nowhere to have this ambitious idea to raise $1 million and make a fan film. Because then you're really rooting for them and you really feel what outsiders there. It doesn't work if they're just, and I was like, God damn it. Because that was a page one rewrite.
I hear that.
He was right. He was totally right. And I did do a page one rewrite. For structural reasons, I turned it into a TV show having to do with the fact that anytime you have one of these making of films, you've got to show the making of the film. Like, and the circumstance of, anyway, I needed the duration of a television show to get through the phases of how they were going to try and make this movie and partially make this movie and have it ruined and messed up. So I turned it into a TV show, but I redid it as Greg had suggested. I made them underdogs, and it's so much better. And I'm so glad I did it. But I bit the bullet. I was like, okay, but I did it.
It reminds me of I don't know if you ever saw the movie American Movie. Did you ever see that documentary?
No.
It's a very famous 90s documentary that's being re-released now on Blu-ray disc. It was an award winner back in the day, kind of a forgotten documentary, but I love it. It's about a filmmaker who lives in the Midwest, who's, kind of drinks, divorced.
I think I did hear this.
Kids. Yeah. He has a friend who's a total stoner, and, he has this ambition to make this kind of like lofty drama called Northwestern, that he's been working on forever.
Yeah, I've heard of
script forever. but in order to get the money for that more lofty, ambitious project, he wants to finish this quickie horror movie that he's been also like working on forever, called it's called Coven, but he doesn't like the way Coven sounds because it rhymes with oven, so he calls it Coven. And basically, the whole documentary is his, you know, Herculean task of finishing this horror short. And it's like, it's such a great documentary, and it reminds me of your pilot, because it's like all these guys in the Midwest who are living lives and have these ambitions and work, trying so hard, and of course they're all their own worst enemies, trying to like get all this stuff done. But it's like, it's truly touching, and for anybody, like, you know, again, who has sort of an impossible dream, it's one of those great documentaries where you're watching this and you're so invested in these characters trying to, you know, overcome these odds to make this movie. And I think Lucas and I have talked on previous shows how we love, you know, Bowfinger and The Disaster Artist and Ed Wood and all these movies about, you know, outsiders, you know, trying to reach their dreams. So Lucas's pilot is a variation, right, of that sort of subplot in these kind of movies about these kind of like kooky characters trying to do something bigger than themselves and facing all sorts of obstacles.
The point I was trying to make is that you just have, when I learned to just eat it and follow the better idea, even if it meant starting from scratch.
Right.
And sometimes multiple times, but it was really the only way. And then I was getting in a situation where I would finish a draft and I would have someone read it. Before they even read it, I go, okay, back to square one. I'd realize what I did wrong. And then it was only through that process of internalizing how these things work, the simplicity that they need. Novels, who told me this? Novels are, can be complicated, but films are simple. They can be sort of told in a complicated way, but no, a novel, that's what it is. It's a movie is a simple story told in a simple way. Or maybe I've ruined this analogy. I should cut this, but I won't, because it's warts and all. But look, movies need a certain simplicity for reasons we still don't understand. They tend to be 2 hours. Some are closer to 3, but then our ass, you know, our butts hurt. And they need the simplicity of somebody wanting something and overcoming obstacles. And you get the story engine from the person wanting it. And you get the story engine from the foreshadowing of the person's problems. And that gives us things to anticipate and then want to see. So that's what makes scripts not boring. And if you have things too complicated, they become boring because you don't have anything to latch onto. And certain movies like Psycho can reset the thing halfway through because it was Hitchcock.
Yeah.
It was for Hitchcock after Vertigo and North by Northwest and all those other famous movies. They'll wait. They will wait to see what Hitchcock does. But for you, they're not going to wait. So you need
Scream also did that, right? Scream opened up with like a 20-page sequence with a big star of the time and killed her off on page 20. And it was such a dramatic thing to do that the audience is like really thrown by that. But you're in the hands of Wes Craven.
Yeah, you're in the hands of Wes, famous people, famous actors, but it's fun. You get it. Oh, it's a self-referential horror movie.
Yeah.
You need the simplicity of the concept. And then what you need to do is find the best execution of the concept. And so I think, but go back to the notes I gave to our friend. I was very concerned about wanting to be helpful. And I was concerned that I might have, might have had some suggestions that weren't going to work for him or that he wouldn't like. And I didn't want him to feel more upset than necessary.
No. I mean, again, it was, your version of this premise was more streamlined and simplified. His version of the premise had more complications and a more, say, exposition. And it was about trying to juggle, all that exposition in a way that that didn't feel like it was throwing off the reader. And so that's a thing, and so your notes were sort of like, well, if I were doing it, I would try to, from the very beginning, create a sort of story engine, for this concept that is more simple and focused and streamlined, and the version of the story that you've decided to tell requires a lot more backstory and a lot more exposition, which when you were reading it was bumping you. And that's the other thing, which is, at the end of the day, like if you're giving notes to a friend, two things that are important are, again, are you giving notes on the movie they wrote versus the movie you'd like to see? Those are two different things. The helpful notes would be, here are notes to improve the version you're trying to write. Now, whether or not you like that version of the story, that's completely different. And you can,
I gotta stop you there a little bit, because
yeah,
I've given a lot of notes, like in my time, well over 100, where part of my learning process over the past several years has been to read other people's scripts. And sometimes you're swapping things, or sometimes I would just ask people for things they're talking about on Facebook or Twitter. I'd say, hey, that sounds cool, can I read it? And then I'd say, hey, dude, do you want notes? And they say, of course. And then, there are a lot of times where I read the first 20 pages and I was like, oh God, I don't want to read this, because it just is not very good. And and again, what I came to learn that I think is correct, but it was a little depressing, is that the single most important thing is truthful human behavior over plot, over character, over the concept. The concept can get you in the door with places, but for making a good script, if you can't understand and observe and then depict authentic human behavior, then it's going to be agony. It really is, because you're reading somebody's version of fake people. It's just melodrama, and it doesn't mean anything, and you can't emotionally connect to it because people are behaving in ways that are phony. And most people, what was depressing is the realization that most people are just not going to be able to do that. They're just not interesting enough people. And I don't want to become a very unpopular YouTube commentator, but it's it's
tricky.
I think it's true. I think it's really true. I think
you could simplify what you said even more. And truthful human behavior is definitely one way to put it. Another way to put it is, when you're watching a piece of material, you have to be able to connect with what those characters are doing in some way that you appreciate. In other words, if you're watching American Psycho with Christian Bale, I mean, in that case, it's not about truthful human behavior. You're watching this kind of like weird sociopath. Same thing with Clockwork Orange. Same thing with Taxi Driver.
But I disagree.
Those kind of movies.
I disagree. I mean, I've never seen American Psycho. I've definitely seen Clockwork Orange and Taxi Driver. I mean, those are completely relatable. I mean, those are very truthful human behavior. I mean, the Taxi Driver, I mean, I totally believe in the reality of that guy and the truth of that guy, and watching him get more and more obsessed and demented. And
they're alienated. They're alienated characters, right?
And Clockwork Orange is it's a masterpiece. It's genius, the way that we empathize with this guy's the purity of his personality and his expression. It just happens to be he expresses himself through violence. And then our hearts are broken when he gets this hideous conditioning, and we want him to reclaim his. It's absolute genius. And I think you're wrong.
I guess I would say that in those movies, the character, whether it's American Psycho or Clockwork Orange, and to some degree Taxi Driver, there are sort of stylistic conceits to their behavior in those movies. Yes. In other words, they're not 100%. You're not watching a docudrama of a sociopath, because the sociopathic character would be so off-putting, that it would be very, very difficult for you to, connect with the character. In a show like The Sopranos or Breaking Bad, you're following these characters as they're kind of, from the beginning. Tony Soprano is somebody who can kill people and go home and kiss his daughter. That's different than Walter White's character, who starts out normal and becomes Scarface.
Now we're talking about an anti-hero, and we're talking about the fact that as Sorkin said, characters are not people. You know,
Right.
they're
Do you disagree
characters.
with it? Do you disagree with that?
Which part?
Characters are not people.
No, I agree with that.
Okay. So in Aaron Sorkin, would you say that his characters follow the truthful human behavior kind of like mandate, or is he kind of
Yes,
like
absolutely.
bending them to suit his thematic purposes? And sometimes they don't necessarily behave 100% like people,
Well,
but
no,
they're
no,
in
no, no.
service
But
to his theme.
no, I think the whole point of saying characters and people is that they never, if people behaved exactly like people, movies, you know, would be
10 hours long.
3 days long and have no ending. I mean, or
Right.
they'd be like those, you know, those French art movies were really boring. No, the thing about Sorkin is that, you know, who's a genius is, I mean, it is true that the characters talk the same. It's because they talk like him. I mean, it's a theatrical, stylized speech, and they all talk very fast. But
Right.
and the other thing he does is that they are so self-aware in a way that's simply not natural.
Right.
So he has casts of 12 versions of Aaron Sorkin where they're all you know saying all the genius things they say. You know,
Yeah.
how you know especially in the West Wing where they were so aware of their role in history and the portraits on the wall, and you know it's extremely stylized, but no, the what motivates them, it's different because they're aware of what motivates them and they're talking out loud about how sometimes they can't control what motivates them.
Right. And comedy also is another violation of what you said, which is, you know, in a movie like Dumb and Dumber, or in certain films, you have a character who's following a quest, but is by definition not acting in a strictly authentic way, but in a kind of a stylized, kind of crazy way. Like their goal might be silly, and the way that they're trying to, you know, achieve their goal might be silly, but it has to be internally logical at the very least, right? You have to be able to say that this character might have a kind of a twisted way of looking at the world, but as long as that twisted way of looking at the world is internally consistent, like Don Quixote say in those stories, you know, it's okay because that character is a little nuts, or a little off, but we understand what his worldview is, and even if the worldview is not one we sympathize with, it's something that we can understand based on this character. So that's what I'm saying. Like we have to at least be able to connect with the character's perspective in the story that we're being told, so that, you know, there are movies that follow a serial killer.
Yeah, well,
right?
I mean, and there's also like, I don't know. I mean, Pee Wee Herman is a ridiculous character, and he just wants his bike back. But we're totally into it. I mean,
right. That's a good example right there. He's not
yeah.
doing what is truthful human behavior,
Yeah,
but
it
he's
is
got
for
a goal
him.
that's simple, and he's childlike, and
It's
he's behaving in
totally
a way that
it's totally truthful for me. You know,
well, truthful to a fictional character. That's what I'm saying. Like you wouldn't do what Pee Wee's doing. You wouldn't have his goals, but you
no,
understand.
I think
his
you're wrong.
perspective.
I think that when Pee Wee is getting
Tell
ready,
me.
I think when he's, you know, he's making breakfast and he's in the bathroom and he's making faces and he sees the tape and he puts the tape up like this to make him laugh. That is 100% true to me. What kid has not taken Scotch tape and thought it very funny to do a pig? I mean, that it's just he's a man child. That's the whole point.
Okay. So truthful to the character's worldview. That's what's true.
Truthful to
not universally true.
Truthful to the human experience in some way, and there can be a conceit of that. This is obviously not a world that actually exists. It's a cartoonishy kind of world, but truthful to the things that the guy wants and that he loves, and that the things.
Well, this is where it starts to get philosophical, right? About like
it does get philosophical.
What is the story engine of anybody? I remember again my college screenwriting teacher telling me every story can get boiled down to one sentence, which is like who wants what and why can't they get it? Like that's really sort of every story, right? I want something. It could be an ice cream. It could be a good night's sleep. It could be I want to find somebody to watch my stupid show with. And what are the obstacles to getting that? Because if there are no obstacles, nobody cares, right? There was an episode of The Simpsons I remember where, you know, the Itchy and Scratchy, the cartoon with the cat and the mouse, was too violent, and Marge Simpson for some reason came in and had to like try to figure out a way to make the show more palatable. And the cartoon that she came up with was Itchy and Scratchy sitting on a porch just drinking lemonade, and that was the entire cartoon. There was no conflict, there was
Yeah, I
no
remember
tension,
that
there was
one.
no anything, and you're just like, yeah, you need drama is conflict, drama is tension.
Look, I don't even know what we're arguing about, but I still maintain that
no, we're
that,
not really arguing.
that
I think it's
truthful
more a
human
question of
behavior
definition.
is number one, and that everything else that we think of as part of the craft of making a script comes out of your own baloney detector and your ability to work from the character's behavior and have the interactions be real and interesting and feel truthful even when they're stylized and made up.
All right,
The
well
thing
then
that,
this
the
is a
thing
good
that
way.
people
Oh, I'm
thing
sorry, I was
that
going to
people
say,
do wrong
yeah,
is
right.
that they construct plot and then try and make everything fit the plot. And the way to do it real is to start from the behavior and what people want, and then have the plot flow out of that.
What I was going to say was this is a good way to segue back into notes, how to give them, how to receive them, because part of what we're talking about is how a person discerns what they find truthful, believable, right? When you're reading something, what you bumped up against in our friend's pilot was there were certain things where you didn't find it believable. A character behaved in a way that you didn't find believable. Obviously, our friend did find them believable because he wrote it that way, right? To him, those ways that characters were behaving were like, well, that happened to me. I did that. I connected with that. That's like something that, you know, either happened to me or a friend. And to me, I found that believable. You read some of those moments and said, I don't find that. I don't even understand that. I'm not sure why that's happening. Now, when you're a writer and you're getting notes in the development process, not giving them, no, getting them. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that you're gonna have to figure out how to deal with, which is, and we can segue into this part too. I'm currently working on a pilot for a television series. So I'm dealing with the development executives who are giving me notes on the material. So now, you know, something I did for 32 years, somebody's now doing to me. They're reading my material.
You've done it before.
Yeah. I've for many years, I've dealt with notes because I've written screenplays over the years. But like right now, exclusively, I'm helping with development in my, in Script Genius, my consulting business. I'm working with writers. When I'm writing, I'm the person receiving the notes. So in this case, I'm in the pilot that I'm working on, I'm getting certain notes that are like what Lukas and I are talking about right now, which is like, I don't know if the character would do this. I don't know if the character would behave that way. I'm not sure if the character would say that. I'm not sure the character would undergo the investigation the way we're talking about, that kind of thing. Now, again, I wrote stuff I believe works. Obviously, or I wouldn't have written it that way, right? So like my first blush attempts to write a pilot come out of my perspective of what I think is truthful human behavior, as Lukas would put it. This is
I gotta ask you a question.
Yeah, sure.
We all have things in our drafts where it's like, well, that gets me from A to B, and I hope it works, And then the notes process is people saying, no, find a better way. And then you go, oh, damn it.
Sure.
And that's a lot of the process. It's you fool yourself into thinking, well, I'll get away with this. And then you realize you can't. And the process of being a better writer is you start to internalize that. So you don't even write it. You go, no, that's never going to work. And
well, ideally, that's the way you write all the time, right? I mean, if you've been down the road, if you're not writing your first story ever at age 7, if you're now, in your 20s, 30s, or 40s, and you have experience, every time you set out to write, there's a little internal mechanism in your brain going like, do I find that credible? Is that believable? Is it too contrived? Can I get away with this? And a lot of times what we as writers do, I'm sure you do this too, right? We watch bad movies that got made and say, well, they did it there. That's a big movie too.
I don't do that.
They got away with it in this movie.
What I used to do to solve problems was just add stuff. And that is a very amateur mistake.
Add stuff. What do you mean? Describe that a little bit more.
Add a twist, add a reversal, add a character, add a not a coincidence. I knew not to do that, Charlie, I've
Right.
lost you for a second. All right.
No, I'm here.
But just to add a,
By the way, that was our mutual friend whose pilot we're discussing
oh,
calling me on.
it
His
was,
ears must be buzzing.
I would
Okay.
add a complication so that I wouldn't have to face the problem that I was facing. So
Sorry,
it could,
so the complication was something that was coming from an outside force, not necessarily from your character, but like you would throw in a
yeah, I
character with a
didn't,
gun.
yes, I throw in they get kidnapped or the ship would crash or, it's like, and these things can be solutions, but then it's,
Right.
what you're doing is you're never going deep enough. And so what I've learned over many years is that it's about making it narrow and deep. And if you
Right.
just keep adding stuff, it becomes shallow and wide. And especially sometimes what people do is the mistake they make is that the whole script is based on adding something. Let's add werewolves to aliens.
Yeah.
Let's add terrorists to school children, or let's add, and so the entire script is an academic exercise in how to try to merge two different movies, but because of that, it doesn't go deep into either one.
Yeah.
And they think like they're geniuses because it's so, they're finding ways to riff on two different genres, and they're remixing
Right.
two different genres, and they think they're super clever. But the truth is that you don't do either one. And the real truth is that there's nothing that is emotionally engaging enough about one character's journey, because it tends to just be, now I'm going to have the guys chasing the werewolves are going to face the guys who are chasing the aliens. We're going to face the government guys. That's just plot. That's just people shooting people and running around. And that is 90% of the stuff that is floating around and that people are peddling.
And so much of that is also, I hate to say it, but it comes down to skill, which is the more skillful a writer you are, the more you can kind of like wallpaper over the contrivance. Because if it's well executed, then you'll go, well, you know what? I mean, yeah, it's kind of like cocked up, but he kind of pulled it off because he was such a kind of a clever, interesting writer. But and one of the other old, axioms is, you can use contrivance to get a character into trouble, but not to get
But
out of
not
trouble.
out of it. Yes.
Yeah, and
Well,
I think that's true.
And,
That's
and I think, but to continue on what I think people do wrong, I know they do wrong, is that they're just they're not introspective enough to be emotional enough in their writing, and it doesn't, because they're using writing as a way to avoid to be avoided, to avoid the pain of their own emotions, personality, circumstances. And so sometimes you do get people who will write like their, the pain script. It's like, this is me, my version of being bullied as a kid, and I'm going to kill them all or not. And then it's interesting that I don't want to generalize too much. I guess I'll have to risk it a little bit. I have read some women have written scripts, or at least when I've read the scripts like this, they tend to be by women, where it's about, like all the awful people you meet when you're dating, and all the bad boyfriend experiences.
right.
And a little goes a long way, because they tend to be about what idiots all the men are.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't look inward enough at themselves to figure out, do they really need to change, or what is, you need to look. It's sort of like being a dirty psychiatrist, which was something said about Peckinpah. I can't remember who said it or why, but someone said Peckinpah was like a dirty psychiatrist. He was just incredibly ruthless and kind of toxic in the way he dissected personalities, and he was especially ruthless to his collaborators. He also, had all kinds of drug and alcohol problems. He was a difficult person, but he was a genius. I mean, as a director, I think absolutely. You can watch a Peckinpah movie, and it can just be some minor scene, but there's something electric about it. Do you agree? Do you know his movies enough?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you can just watch Straw Dogs, where it's just Dustin Hoffman and these British hooligans in a pub, and they're not doing anything. They're just talking, but it just crackles. It's there, and you, or like the first scene in Ride the High Country, when the two old friends meet and they shake hands, and he looks and he sees that the threads are all frayed on his cuff because
Yeah.
he's not doing well. It's just that there's stuff that there are people who are observant enough to go into these human experiences and then make a character that is a truthful composite of these human characteristics, and then has a narrative that it goes from the inside out. And so what people do wrong is that they're running from their lives, and they love movies, and they try to combine movies, and they try to be super clever, and they have such delight in the format, because there's not a lot of words. You can write a lot of pages pretty quickly if they're not really editing the thoughts.
Right.
So it's is it therapy, or is it a vocation? And
I think the best version of it is both, right? I mean, the people that are at the highest end of our business.
You're right. But I think we haven't done one of these shows in like a month, and they kind of tapered off, and I was disillusioned by a bunch of things. I was disillusioned that we could interview really interesting people, and I couldn't get more than a few hundred people to watch it. And at a certain point, I didn't want to keep sort of pimping it on the internet, because it was starting to look a little cheesy. But then I was also, I think I've had a larger disillusionment that there's so many thousands of people trying to write. And what occurred to me is that they're really not trying to write better. They're trying to feel better. And it's not the same thing. It's
well,
not.
I think that's true across the board, don't you? I mean, whatever you're writing, it doesn't matter whether it's songs, plays, books, comic books, screenplays, the reason anybody wants to do that is, they feel like they have something creative in them trying to get out. But also kind of interwoven with that, whether they know it or not, is they're putting down sort of like a view of the world as they understand it. But again, they're starting out. They don't have the skill set yet, right? They're just starting. So it's like some of them are going to like write one or two things and half finish it, never finish the screenplay, whatever it is. And then other people, the ones who are destined to make it, are the ones who are going to write multiple drafts, multiple things. They're going to keep going because there's something in the back of their brain that's just like they have to do it. And those people are going to be the Stephen Kings. Those are the Aaron Sorkins. Those are going to be people.
I mean, but there's I do want to. All right, so I don't want to be just a total miserable
Debbie
person.
Downer.
No, I don't, because I have like really all the empathy and compassion in the world for people who try to do this and who like to be creative and want to be creative and enjoy being creative, and then have the dreams of being successful and seeing their thing get made, and getting adulation, or all the approval that we want, the validation of having your film be made and be a hit.
Sure.
I think that there's a lot of emotional toughness that you need, that that I have. I've had a lot of I had an easy life in a lot of ways, but I think that I've had experiences that make me emotionally very resilient. I'm very persistent and methodical, and I've dealt with a lot of adversity. And I've had these weird experiences. Like my hero was Jerry Goldsmith, the composer, and I did Film Score Monthly, and I have a Logan's Run poster behind me that he scored, and I did a CD of Logan's Run. And I met Jerry Goldsmith, and he almost threw me off the scoring stage of LA Confidential because he hated my magazine. And I told that story in my blog. And it's like, I was.
But I mean, what a great real life movie moment, right? To actually meet, your hero, and it turns out that it's a cliche. Literally, don't meet your heroes.
No, but I don't agree. I met a lot of my heroes, and a lot of composers are really great, and some of them were.
But he's one of the top guys for you, right? I mean, Jerry Goldsmith.
Oh yeah, he's in the pantheon. Yeah,
he's in the pantheon.
Top 5 composers. He just was a very sensitive person, and he did not like the fact that a bunch of kids were writing a magazine about movie scores and saying, I like this one, I don't like that one, and he
Bunch of
repeated himself.
snot-nosed punks that are like
Bunch of
sitting
snot.
there in the
Yeah, yeah.
judgment of my
Some
career.
some of
Yeah.
these composers, it just goes to temperament and personality. Some of these composers met me and were really charmed, and they truly didn't care. It meant nothing to them if a bunch of kids said they didn't like a score or something. And then there are some that were like, oh, that's fine, and wouldn't even read it. And there are some that really read it, and because we liked them, they always liked us. And there were some who just like thought we were the devil. And
But what does that tell you about Goldsmith if you're talking about being a student of the human personality? If
oh,
Goldsmith
I know
didn't
his.
care what you had to say, it wouldn't have bothered him. He clearly
Oh,
it did.
he was a very sensitive. He was a very sensitive man. He is a very interesting person. He was a genius as a composer. I mean,
Definitely.
just so. I mean, yeah. It's
Just
a long story.
the range of his scores, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he's one of those guys who had such a range in terms of like, you know, his musical language. You know,
his ability to compose and orchestrate was just at like a such a gifted level, and the skill and the melody and the ideas and the colors and the interesting approaches, and his ability to capture the emotion and the ideas of a film. And we sort of, what happened is, as he got into his final years, I think he became a little sentimental, and I think that's an opinion other people share. And we sort of called him out on that, and he didn't like it. So he snapped at me at LA Confidential that I didn't want to go on a sidetrack with this. The point was that, like, when people, I always loved Ed Wood for a lot of reasons, but I love that moment when he's on the phone and he's like, worst film you ever saw? Well, my next one will be better. It's
a great personality and a great attitude to have, right? Because two things struck me about the stories that you're telling right now. One is learning how to deal with rejection and failure.
Yes.
Because that is obviously, you're not going to make it in this business, any competitive business. It doesn't matter. I mean, anything that's entertainment related or athletic, it's about how do you deal with failure is at least as important or more important than how you deal with success, because you're going to have a lot more of it for Christ's sake. You're going to have a lot of failure at the beginning of, trying to make it in a highly competitive business, but it's how you learn to deal with it. And I have, a range of writer friends who all deal with it in different ways. It's like, and the other thing you just brought up that's interesting is, you say as people get older, they get more sentimental. I think that's true. I find that happening with me. I'm like in my mid 50s now, and I'm at a portion of my life where my kids are in their 20s. My daughter just moved to London to live and work in London. I'm not going to see her as often anymore. My son is living in my old house. I just moved into a new house in a different city. I'm not going to see the kids as much as I used to anymore. But during COVID, for 2 years, they were both living with me. And we had sort of an extended period where I thought I was going to be an empty nester early, and I wasn't. And now that this big, huge contrast has happened in my life, which is like these kids that I grew up with and raised are gone and no longer part of my daily life. And my wife and I are living now in a new home.
Yeah.
It's a massive amount of like geographic and emotional upheaval. And it's making both of us much more sentimental about the good old days. And we're looking at, videos and photographs, and it's making us misty eyed, because it's like you're at a different part of your life. You spent 30 plus years getting to this point, raising the kids and building a life and all this kind of stuff. And suddenly there's a radical change from that now. And you realize that will never be the case again. Maybe you'll see the kids a couple of times a year, maybe for the big holidays, but they're not going to be part of your life the way that they just were. And there's a lot to it. So when you're saying what you're saying, I completely, thoroughly understand that perspective, right? And that's the reason why a lot of artists, as they get older, it's hard to keep being on the edge like that, because you're not going to be on the edge through your whole life. That's just not the way most people work. At a certain point, you settle into a groove, and you kind of, you look at something from every perspective imaginable, the things you're fascinated with thematically, and you start to, replay yourself and just repeat yourself. And that is inevitably something that happens with almost every artist. There are very few people that don't, that aren't like that. But it's true. That is a part of being human, is like looking back now. What is it? Life has to be lived moving forward, but can only be understood looking backwards.
That
That's
sounds
that's
familiar.
absolutely true. And it's just, but all those things are part of when you're writing, making integrating those things so that when you're writing these characters in these stories, that it feels authentic. Older people either do get like very embittered, or they do get kind of nostalgic, and they do, or it's a combination of the two, right? There's no one way to do it. But getting back to the notes of it all, what you were talking about in terms of
Please.
like you're giving your opinion when you're reading a person's material about what's landing for you and what's not landing for you, which is a very subjective experience, right? So, and this is a reason why, I mean, well, here, let me put it this way. You have certain genres, artists, stories that you like. And there's certain ones that are popular that you don't like, right? There are certain movies that are wildly popular, you just don't like them. For whatever reason, you, Lucas, you don't like them.
Correct.
But that doesn't mean they're not super popular. And if you were capable of writing them, you'd be mega rich, because it's like those things are popular. McDonald's is super popular. The food's crap, but it's super popular. Not everybody can eat at Arnie Morton's every night. Most people eat at McDonald's. So when you're giving notes on anything, it's coming from your subjective perspective.
But still,
well, hold on, let me finish. When I worked at Bruckheimer for 30 years, right? I didn't love every single project we developed. That would be impossible. At any given time, we were developing 2 to 3 dozen different projects, different genres, all across the board. Things that I don't watch, frankly. Certain types of stories and genres I'm not crazy about. But my job is to make them better, even if it's not something that I love. So the whole point is, I still have to find a way to improve these things that are not necessarily, that I like, that are in my wheelhouse, but I still professionally have to find a way to make it better. So that's what I'm trying to do when I'm reading a piece of material. All I can do is give my honest assessment of like, this wasn't clear, that joke wasn't funny, this moment felt kind of flat. It could have been a little bit more dramatic. And it's like I'm interpreting it through my individual filter for this material. What you feel might be completely different, but there's going to be probably a lot of overlap in terms of things that are like confusing. And those are the notes that have to be addressed, because, if one person gives you one note and you agree with it or don't agree with it, that's up to you. But if 10 people read it and 8 of them give you the same note,
of course,
you can't. If you ignore that, you're just crazy, because that's universally people are telling you this moment didn't work for me, didn't land for me, I didn't understand it. Well, you better fix that damn note. Now, if one of them says, well, I wish the guy was wearing like a Mets jacket instead of a Yankee jacket because of bop it up, but that's up to you. You can do whatever you want to do with that note. But the ones that are the overlap notes are always the most important ones, and you ignore those at your peril.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I understand that some things are very popular, but I think that I'd be capable of helping with notes on something that was intended to be one of those things. But I do know that a lot of those things are super popular. They're especially simple, the way that they're executed and structured, and the way that everything works together. So, I mean, it's just true that.
But when you say simple, it's a little misleading. Simple is hard.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that
simple is incredibly hard.
Right. So what I'm saying is that if I was given the assignment of like, here's a script for something you don't like, so a slasher movie or some stupid action movie with heads exploding, can you help make it better? I would be able to look at it and say, yeah, because the premise is overly complicated in this way, and that it can't be both about avenging the dog and getting the kid back. Pick one or the other, and introduce it sooner. It's Taken is not. He's also trying to be an interior designer, You know, it's like
That would be an interesting version, though. But yeah,
but
yeah.
that's what a lot of these things are. And one of the notes I gave our friend is that, you know, you sort of have two backstories here, and I think you just need to pick one.
Right,
And
right. And that would be, again, like,
which I thought was a good note. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and in his case, I think he's getting notes from a bunch of different people, and you know, some of the notes are overlap, some of the notes are
Mhm.
not. He's going to have to decide which of those notes he agrees with, and that he'll move forward with, that'll improve it based on his own expectations of what it is. But none of the notes that he's getting right now at this point are studio notes, professional notes. What he's getting notes from writer friends that are giving him their, you know,
What would the
unvarnished
studio
two
notes be?
cents.
Are you capable of?
Here's the thing. So studio notes will, of course, be different for a variety of reasons, right?
Right.
It'll be based on what are the other programs they're developing at the time. What's the budget of this going to be? Who are the particular filmmakers they're considering trying to attach to the piece, and how would it more align with you know, with what they're trying to do? You know, what are the mandates coming down from the network or from the studio in terms of, you know, the kinds of stories they're trying. All those things you
Yeah,
can't possibly know them in
business
advance.
notes. Yeah.
Right. Those things are gonna like weigh in, and you might be rolling your eyes at those things. But like, the truth of the matter is, you were lucky enough to sell your material.
Right.
So now that you're lucky enough to sell your material, you've got to hit these notes. Going back to the pilot that I'm working on. So I'm writing a pilot for an international production company. It's not an American-based production company, but an international production company. And as a result, there are certain things about the international television market that I'm not conversant in. I don't know these things. So I'm relying on the development executives to educate me about those things. Like, if I have a
Did you hear
scene that's set, what's that?
Did you hear don't make a black lead because the international
Oh
market is
no,
racist?
no. It's more like budget stuff. Like, I had a scene that was set in like Singapore. Right now, it could be set anywhere. You know, I just thought Singapore was kind of an interesting city, kind of exotic. You know, kind of a cool location where the scene was taking place. And you know, we had the notes meeting, and he's just like, yeah, you know, it might be better to do it in Rome or Italy than Singapore, just for these tax reasons, for these budget reasons. I was like, okay,
Right.
that's easy enough to do. Like, I'm not so wedded to Singapore that it has to be Singapore. I just thought it was kind of interesting. But okay, that's helpful. Now I know that. That's easy, and that's, you know, I don't have any investment in that, right? But then there are other notes about, you know, we want more twists or more surprises, and so can we kind of rewrite this scene or this sequence so that the audience expectations are a little bit more, you know, they're surprised at the end of it. And so the more of those kind of notes I got, it was about trying to figure out, okay, so right now I'm adding too much information in the scene so that the audience is with our character and understands what's going on. You want to remove some of that information from the scene so that the viewer, the audience, it doesn't have as much information about this. So when we get to the end of it, they could be a little bit more surprised by the payoff or by the result, because they're not with the character every step of the way. Yeah. Okay. So it's about getting down to the specifics of like, okay, well, how do we do what you want? Because it's like, that's fine. I'm happy to give you what you want, but let's be very, very specific about what is it that you want and that you're going for. Let's define those terms, and then now I can go off and try to figure out, all right, how can I work within the parameters of what you want, you know, maintain the scene, get across the information that we need, but have the experience be what you want, which is like a more of a surprise, more of a twist, more of something that's unexpected. And again, I don't have a problem with that, but there were a couple of times where that request came up, and I'm like, you're trying too hard for the twists. That's too much now. Now it feels contrived. Now it feels like you're doing it one too many times, and it's starting to feel like, you know, rote, or you know, it just doesn't feel authentic anymore. And you know, we agreed, okay, sometimes you have to pick your battles. Maybe I can't do that in every single scene, but it's like there are certain scenes where it's more important, certain sequences where it's more important. You find that balance. But you know, yeah, it is important as a writer also to kind of like go, here's what I was trying to do. Here was my intent. Here's what I wanted to try to do. Now, maybe I didn't pull that off, but that was what I was intending. So then they understand and go, oh, okay, all right, well, if that's what you meant, maybe I didn't follow that. There was a note where a character found something, an item, a clue, and it was just that the development person had misread what I wrote. It had assumed it was something that it was not, and I had to explain when we had our notes call. It's like, oh, you're misunderstanding. That's not the thing you think it is. That's something else. That was, I guess, an error on my part. I wasn't clear enough in describing it, because then he had a bunch of notes that were all related to that one misread thing. And it was just like, no, 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 no. It's not that thing.
A
It's something,
clerical
something else.
error. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, and it was like, oh, okay, all right, and that's clear. And it's just, it was one of those. It's an easy note. That's an easy note. I made a mistake, or rather, I could be clearer, and I was able to clarify that. But I'm trying, and again, because I've been doing this for so long, it's not like I have the same ego that I had when I was like in my 20s or my 30s. It's more like, well, I wrote that because I thought it worked. But if you don't think it works, and you're the person that I'm trying to please, because you have to go out and sell this show to, the European television networks all over the place, probably better than I do what they're looking to buy, what they want. So it's like, I'll take my cue from you, and I'll do the best job that I can to try to execute it to the best of my ability. And I know it's probably not going to happen in one pass. Some of the things will get fixed in one pass, but then other things might take a couple more passes. But that's just the process. One of the things, Lucas and I belong to a Facebook screenwriting, group, and there's a lot of new writers that probably haven't written anything yet, or just starting to write their first thing, that have this expectation about the sanctity of their material, that when they sell it, somehow it's going to remain, as true as it is that, when they wrote it, or that the people buying it are going to have to get permission to make changes. And it's like, again, I don't want to those people, and some of you may be watching this, I'm not making fun of you. It's like anything else. If you're learning something in a new trade and you don't understand what the rules are of the world that you're getting into, it doesn't matter whether it's a book, it doesn't matter whether it's a screenplay. If you're selling it to somebody and they're buying it, that means that they now have the ability to dictate how they are going to change or modify your material for production. Because here's the thing, they're going to be spending millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on that material that they just bought from you. So they have the rights, when they buy that material, to change the material to suit them. Yes, even if it's based on a true story. Yes.
Have we,
even if, yeah.
Have we talked about the Seven story? Or do you know it?
The Andrew Kevin Walker Seven? No, tell me.
The script was insane. It's basically the movie that Fincher made.
Okay.
And so they bought the script. They're like, of course we can't do that. And they rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it. And it just was getting mushy and lame.
Watered down.
And what happened by mistake, it was sent to Fincher, do you want to direct this? And by mistake, they sent the original version. And he loved it. He's like, yeah, I want to do this. And they're like, oh my God, we made a terrible mistake. We sent you the wrong draft. He's like, no, I want to make this one. And that's how we got Seven.
That's fascinating. Is that true?
Yes.
That's a great
I'm surprised
story.
you didn't know that. Yeah.
No, if I did, I've forgotten more about this industry than you will ever know.
So I was just thinking, about circumstances like that. There's so many famous, it's like, we're talking, for the stuff that people at the amateur level are creating, that if there was anything that people wanted to develop professionally, it's going to change. And yet the film business has so many famous examples of things that were passed on, put in turnaround, almost not made.
Yeah.
E.T. was in turnaround. Was it Columbia? They're like, yeah, we don't want to do this. Like,
Home Alone, E.T.
Home Alone, and he was already Spielberg. And they said, no, we don't want to do E.T. It's like crazy. And Home Alone was put in turnaround, and
Back to the Future was passed on by every single studio for years and years and years.
There's so many Star Wars, Star Wars, only Alan Ladd made that happen.
Everybody passed on the Da Vinci Code when it was a manuscript before it was published as a book. Every single studio passed on it.
Harry Potter, Yeah,
every publisher passed on it.
every publisher passed on it until someone's kid grabbed the sample chapter and said, "Hey, mom, is there any more of this?"
This was Scholastic ultimately like published
Whatever
the
it
book.
was.
Yeah, well, no,
Whatever
because
it
that's
was. That's the story, that the
yeah,
like some executive had the sample, and the kid
right,
read it and was like, "I want to read more of this." And they're like, "Hey, this might
right.
be good." It was like it's stuff that stupid. And then in television, that like the Sopranos, Law and Order was actually shot for one network and ended up on a. I think that's correct. It was shot.
Hmm.
The pilot was shot for either CBS or Fox. I don't recall.
Interesting.
Law and Order
Yeah,
took like 2 years to get made,
yeah.
and like the Sopranos, they were developing for network. And like, no, they wanted, if the Sopranos was on network, it would be Armando Sante. It would not have been Jimmy Gandolfini. And then
No, it's again, it's just amazing how often that happens, because again, there's no rules. Everybody's just trying to do their best to try to like make the material as best as they can, but the development process is reviled, because it's sort of like too many cooks and everybody's kind of like throwing in their 2 cents or feel like they need to justify their job by giving a note, even if the note doesn't make any sense. And yeah, there's some of that because it's that there's human nature, but
they tend
yeah,
they tend to do poorly. They tend to do the worst with things that are just different, things that are good, but there's something unorthodox about them. It's about, like,
right.
everyone turned down the West Wing after he had made The American President. Said, no, we can't do politics on television.
Or we had Michael Lehman on the show, and Michael was talking about Heathers, which is
Right.
like, talk about like a screenplay that like in any universe in any decade would be like a super hard sell.
Yeah.
But like that's something that you can't really develop much of, because it's like such a weird, it's like Donnie Darko. How do you develop Donnie Darko? How do you develop like certain cult movies that just come out the way they are? It's like, you've seen The Room, the Tommy Wiseau movie. That's certainly not coming out of development. That's coming out of
I
one
actually
person.
haven't, but I saw
Oh,
the
okay.
Disaster
Well,
Artist.
then you're in for a treat, my friend.
No, but there's yes, they do poorly with things that are just very unconventional,
That are unique.
that are
Yes.
unique, and then
Mhm.
then they dismiss, well, that's a non-repeating phenomenon.
Yeah, or if it's successful, then they clone the shit out of it. Pardon me,
Yeah.
clone the hell out of it.
Yeah.
Like X-Files is like a show that like they cloned mercilessly, but I'm sure that it was hard to kind of get that off the ground originally. And Hollywood imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. That's what happens.
You just need, that's where the sort of alchemy of it comes down. You just need one champion, one executive to say, nope, I'm going to bet on this guy. I'm going to bet on this script. We're doing this. I don't care what it costs. And a lot of those probably end up failing. And that's very risky for those people. I love
That is true.
stories.
That is true. And I have this sneaking suspicion that the stories that we hear about after the fact about somebody championing something, that they're
Yeah.
embellishing a little bit. In other words, it was just the luck of the draw. The stars were aligned that day, and somehow this weird thing, like you just said, with Seven got past committee, and then like the story is retconned into like and I stood on principle and I got that
Yeah,
thing.
right.
It's like nobody stands on principle in this business unless you're literally like at the very, very apex. You're Tom Cruise. He stands on principle. Okay, the head of the studio can stand on principle. Nobody else can stand on principle. You just can't really do it.
Are you watching Andor?
No, I haven't watched any of the Star Wars shows, to be honest with you.
It's so good.
You're loving it?
I love it. I knew I would, and I do. It's so good. It's a grown-up Star Wars show.
A grown-up, that seems like a oxymoron, but
it is not. It's because they're not doing Jedi, they're not doing the Force, they're doing Rebels, the beginning of the rebellion.
Okay.
And it's all being treated in a very grounded, gritty way. It's as if people are real people, and it's Tony Gilroy who not only
are people who are Star Wars fans, like just garden variety Star Wars fans, responding as favorably as you are, or is it more of an acquired taste?
Well, it's an acquired taste in that some fans don't like it because they've never seen grown-up shows. Like the people who are like, this sucks, it's too slow, or the people who didn't watch The Wire,
right?
Didn't watch Better Call Saul, who didn't watch The Sopranos, because when you slow it down, because you're making the people behave more like real people, then you're following it for the character experience, for that human connection with what would it actually be like to be a rebel and not a cartoon character.
Well, there is a type of story that does this, and sometimes when it works, it's really interesting, and sometimes the material can't sustain that level of scrutiny. Like the Joker movie, right? This is a character in the Batman universe who nobody really given any thought to, and so these guys come along and we're like, we're going to do the Joker by way of like a Martin Scorsese movie, and they're investing it with sort of like a level of like tone and character and credibility that like is very surprising for that kind of material, and it worked for the Joker, right? You could say Nolan did the same thing for the Batman movies, right? They took this thing that in the 60s was like this pop art cartoony over the top thing, which was the version of Batman for a long time, like for like more than half a century. That's what you thought of Batman, and then somebody comes along and goes, what if we throw all that out? The thing that everybody knows about Batman, what if we completely go, what if Batman were real? And it's like, that could work or not work depending on the execution of the individual artist.
Well,
Nolan is so talented, he was able to pull that off. But there could have been a version where that was like,
well, there was the Joel Schumacher version. Well, there was the Tim Burton version, which at the time was like, well, this is so gritty and realistic, and then compared to the Nolan version, that's a comic book too. Well, it's hard when you have the conceits you have to deal with. In Superman, you have to deal with the conceit that he puts on his glasses. Who is that? It's like, that's not real. It's so funny. I read about Andor that the whole story premise, Tony Gilroy said, was because he had to deal with Diego Luna's accent.
Oh.
It's a Mexican actor. So he has a Mexican accent. And he's like, how do I explain that in the Star Wars universe, which is not anything that anybody who's ever written Star Wars before cared about.
Right.
Because obviously they're not from England or from America. It's all this made up world. But
right.
So he created a backstory to explain why the character would speak with an accent, because he was from a failed colony and so forth and so on. But
okay,
it was that level of detail, and that level, what it really does is that, it's in Star Wars, the first Star Wars, the great Star Wars, the ends of the movie is they get in their fighters and they attack the Death Star and they blow it up. But
right,
they don't have the waiting period. And so Andor is about, like, this is just sort of hypothetical because they haven't done this exactly yet, but what if you were about to go on a mission, you're probably going to die. It's for a cause you believe in. What's that 24 hours like?
Yeah, wasn't there a Spike Lee movie, 25th Hour or something like that, that was kind of dealing with that same idea?
I know there's a movie by that title. I never saw it. I don't know.
I think that's what it is. And it was an early David Benioff.
Yeah, but you don't put that into Star Wars. So in Andor, he just put everything real about how people would behave, and he put it into Star Wars. And now they have blaster fights that are terrifying. You know how on the Star Wars, the blaster fights are always like, the stormtroopers can't hit anybody. It's kind of just a big cartoony joke.
Right.
But there's some shootout scenes in Andor that you're like, ooh, you're fearing for everybody's life, and it's incredibly well done.
It sounds great. I mean,
you gotta watch it.
Again, it sounds like what a good writer does with material, or a good artist of any kind does with, like, a certain kind of material, and investing it with more intelligence and more emotionality.
Yeah, well, it's the guy who wrote Michael Clayton, which is the weirdest hitman scenes of all time, where this woman on the street corner hires the hitman to cover up the corporate secret, and he's explaining how it works, and she goes, okay, and he goes, okay, you understand, or okay, proceed. I mean, it's genius. The guy's a genius. He's great.
Right. But I mean, I think that's another interesting way about, if somebody came to you and said, Lukas, we want to do a Godzilla movie, but we don't have anything other than Godzilla, right? You're going to come at it from your perspective and go, I don't know, I love these movies when I was a kid, but now I'm like, in my 40s and I've had children, and like, these movies are about people and truthful human behavior. And so what am I going to do in a Godzilla movie? Because like Godzilla is the star of the Godzilla movies, but
Yeah, I
I
never
can't get
liked
into Godzilla's
those.
head.
I never.
They're the best one, honestly, I think is the first one that is it Gareth Edwards did, because they
Yeah,
treated Godzilla like the shark in Jaws. And for the first half of the movie, you'd see bits and pieces
yeah.
of Godzilla. And frankly, to me, when I was a kid, the scariest thing about Godzilla is the size. I would have dreams when I was like 10, 11 years old of street level perspective of Godzilla in a city that were terrifying. If you think about it, right? He's 400 feet tall and he's stomping through a city. Like if you're on the ground, that must be 9/11 level panic, scary. Like that's the scary thing, not a long shot of him over the city with like
Yeah,
Tinker
yeah,
Toy
yeah.
City. It's being in the city. So they did a very good job in the first movie of sort of establishing what that might be like in a world where people didn't know there were things like that. And like it's almost like a force of nature or like a weather event. And it's like it was really well done. And then it got progressively worse until the last one, which was Godzilla versus Kong, which idea-wise I love. And then you watch the movie and you're just like, boy, like every bad decision was made. And again, no offense to the filmmakers, one of whom I know is a friend of mine. It's hard when you have these elements and you have to do the best you can to try to make all these things work in the existing mythology. And could Chris Nolan have done it? Maybe, I don't know. But like the version that got made, let's say, was a little wanting. All I'm saying is that if you had to do it, you'd have to figure it out.
I'd figure it
Right?
out. Yeah,
They're going to pay you $500,000, Lucas, in like 12 weeks, or was it
oh
14,
hell
16
yeah,
weeks
I'd
from
figure
now?
it out.
Yeah, you
I'd get
figure
right
something
on
out.
it.
Yeah,
I'd get right on it. Yes, sir.
you
Yeah.
get right on it. But anyway, yeah. Hopefully, some of this has been helpful in terms of how notes are given or received, but they are absolute. You will get them no matter what from your friends, from the studio, and it's very important that you
Let's
listen to them.
close about the concept that writers talk about, the note behind the note. Can you explain that?
Well, why don't you tell me what you think the note behind the note is, and I can try to
It
confirm
just
whether or not
means
that's
it
right.
means when people give you notes, sometimes it'll be kind of wrong or literal or not very useful, but you have to think about what the problem was that made them give the note. And it could be, so if they're saying like, can you make this, can you make him like peanut butter? It's could be, the note is really, can you make him like anything? Can you give him a connection to something?
Right.
So you're finding the emotional problem that the reader was having, if it was too slow or too boring or too diffuse. And then, so even if the specific note was kind of not actionable, you're figuring out why they felt the need to give a note there in any case.
Yeah, I mean, I think invariably if you're the writer who's receiving those notes, you're kind of triangulating and doing that with every note they're giving you, which is sort of like what perspective are you reading it from, and you're trying to figure out based on the notes, like, what are you actually questioning or asking. And that's when you, like, again, the notes session I just had was, let's just get right under the hood to the nitty gritty, which is like, what is it that you're bumping up against? Let's talk specifically about that. I'll tell you my intention of what I was trying to do as a writer, and then you can either agree with it or disagree. If you agree with it, let's come up with a mutual solve that we both buy. And if you disagree with it, then let's try to come up with some variation that, again, I can get on board. Because the thing is, you as the writer are going to have to execute the note. You have to make sure you understand the note to fix it. The worst thing, and this happens sometimes, is that you're getting notes, you're nodding that you understand what the notes are, but you're scared to ask for clarification of the note. And then what you wind up doing is you wind up rewriting something entirely different. They're like, no, that's not what I meant at all.
I always like getting written notes, because I like to get the whole thing. It's like, sock it to me, tell me everything wrong, and then let me start to assess and go, okay, this is minor, that's stupid, this is real, I got to worry about this. So I like getting it all in writing so I can think about it and then have the discussion. When I'm getting it verbally, I'm like, how much more? So I'm like too distracted because I'm anxious. Okay, what's the next one? What's the next? I just want to get to giving all the problems, and then let me start to put the baby back together.
Also, the written notes, they can't backtrack and say, I didn't say that.
Yeah,
Like
right.
sometimes it happens too, which is like, well, you said you didn't
Yeah.
understand. I didn't say that. It's like, okay, all right, you know, maybe I was wrong, and you don't want to fight with them. But again, notes is just it's the way of developing anything, and it's like they make jokes about it in
Mhm.
movies and TV shows all the time. There's a whole episode. I don't know if you remember Larry Sanders
I love Larry
show.
Sanders. Yeah.
There was an episode of Larry Sanders, which is, I mean, again, as somebody who did this for a living, it was one of the funniest episodes ever. But a junior writer on the show at the beginning of the episode was like, screw everybody, I sold the pilot to the network, I'm out of here. He was like, he was so arrogant because he had
Hmm.
just sold his pilot to the network, and the whole episode for a half hour was the development process of him getting notes and how they had assigned Dave Chappelle to be on the pilot that he wrote,
Hmm.
and how bit by bit by bit it stopped being his idea and started being whatever Dave Chappelle wanted it to be. But because Dave Chappelle's a star, you kind of have to like pay attention to him and like ignore everything that the pilot was until by the very end of the episode, it just didn't resemble anything that he had written.
Yeah.
And he was so dispirited and so depressed. But it was so real in terms of
Yeah.
just like how they got the dynamic down of the network executives talking to him and Dave Chappelle kind of throwing these, whatever Dave Chappelle threw out, it could be like the stupidest tidbit, but it's like they seized on that because it's like, well, that's what the star likes. We have to hold on to that really tight. All the thinking and everything you did, it doesn't matter. You have to be flexible. All that stuff is flexible. And by the end of it, he was a shattered wreck who went back to the show.
I
But
do
it's a
remember that.
great,
Yeah.
it's a great episode, and it is sadly it is sometimes that's true. The development process does not always result in a better product. A lot of times it does. Sometimes it's really all for the better, and then sometimes yes, it can destroy a piece of work. You don't know starting out what's going to happen, what your fate is. Like choose your own adventure. You don't know how it's going to end up, but the best you can hope for is that the executives that you're working with are smart, that you and he have the same vision of what the
Hmm.
project is going to be. You're on the same page creatively. Hopefully, you'll do that at the beginning of the process, and that you have a rapport, and then you can be honest and ask, follow up questions about like what they have a problem with, and try to spitball answers in the room if possible, if they want to do that. And then again, it's not going to be one and done. You're not going to do one session back and forth where it's like they're going to give you written or verbal notes. You execute the notes. Great, get Spielberg on the phone. That is
Yeah.
not the way it works. In fact, the notes process for a project, and I hate to say this, could take 5 years, 7 years, could take 10 years. And then sometimes, as Lukas just mentioned, all those 10 years can come back to the original screenplay through some just like accident,
Yeah.
twist of fate. Doesn't mostly happen like that, but sometimes it happens like that. And
On
that's
that note, folks.
yeah, yeah. Just get used to it. It's
All
part of the
right.
process. But this was fun, Lukas. We
All
didn't
right.
need a third party.
No.
We got a lot of good information across, and we got our old sort of razzle dazzle back. This was good. I hope
Okay.
you guys got a lot out of it. I know I did.
All right. Yeah, it's good to do this again. We'll do it more. All right,
All
folks,
right.
that's it. Okay. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, audience.
Thank you,
And we'll
Lukas.
see you next time.
Thanks, gang. Bye.